Hello and welcome. I'm Jaya Srinivas. Former Kerala Chief Minister VS Achuthanandan has passed away at the age of 101. Tributes continue to pour in Kerala capital, and as his last rites are currently underway at the Kerala capital, Thiruvananthapuram. Joining us is senior journalist Mr. MG Radhakrishnan to discuss and decode the very legacy of VS, as he fondly called. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Mr. MGR. I would like to begin with you there. As Kerala bids adieu to one of to political colossus, what did VS Achuthanandan ultimately stood for? You tracked his career and the Communist Party of India Marxist quite closely.
Well, VS Achuthanandan, VS as he was universally known very fondly, was much more than a politician because he was seen as a moral compass of Kerala society, especially when politics or the political field, not just in Kerala but across the country and even outside, was getting increasingly devoid of principles, values, integrity, and um, things like that. V.S. Achuthanandan was a glorious exception in the sense that he had a life full of sacrifices, selflessness, agitation, struggles, and all in his perseverance to improve the lives of his fellow beings.
He was often the party's most popular face, but also a person critic within the party, Communist Party of India, Marxist. Was VS a rebel or within the CPIM, or is he a moral compass, as you said?
Well, VS was, his core of his persona was agitation, right from his young days as a boy or as a young man in the Alappuzha district, which was soon to become the Red Bastion of Kerala. He was associated with all kinds of struggles against every form of injustice, be it against royalty or the landlords or the colonial masters, or later on against the corporate greed of capitalists, and also because particularly what makes him so distinct is that he did not spare even his own party people or party leaders when he thought that they were faltering from what he or the party or his ideology stood for. So he was, as you know, he was the last surviving member of the 32, uh, members of the National CPI, the Undivided Party's National Council, who walked out from the National Council and formed the CPIM. Afterwards, he became, so by about 40s itself, he was almost a national leader, but of the Communist Party. And then he had a long innings in the party's leadership as he became party secretary, state secretary during the 80s, when he was instrumental in initiating very strong punitive actions against such formidable leaders like MV Raghavan or KR Gauriamma. This was in 80s and 90s. So, but what happened afterwards is that he had a long saga of struggle against the party, the CPM's own leadership for various reasons, and this continued for a long time. And during this course, he was actually pushed to the margins by the dominant leadership. And the 1996 election saw assembly election saw him even getting defeated in a red bastion in his own home district of Alappuzha, which was actually engineered by his rivals. So then on, he was almost like he was fighting back like a wounded tiger. And so he had all kinds of operations to see that his rivals are defeated. And so that was the first stage of his opposition within the CPIM. That was the time when he was against the trade union leaders of the party or the other top leaders of in the CPIM. Then, by the late 90s, gradually he took over. He could actually come around and come back to the top of the leadership in the way that in a way And in that particular endeavor, he was actually backed by who was his commander in chief at that time, who was none other than a young Pinarayi Vijayan. But the second stage of his political innings in the party, that is within the party, he was actually, doing so many things outside the party. Is taking on the corrupt leaders of the other party. He was fighting for environment and other things. But inside the party also, he was having the second stage of his, his hostilities inside the party was against Pinarayi Vijayan himself, because he himself became a power center. And then the next 20 years was actually spent for this particular, encounter between Pinarayi Vijayan and VS Achuthanandan. But in that during that course, the Pinarayi Vijayan was a strong organizational leader, and even when Achuthanandan was actually becoming assuming almost an iconic status outside the party, Pinarayi Vijayan was actually strengthening himself inside the organization. So what happened was, ultimately, Pinarayi Vijayan became a victor in the organizational operations, and V.S. Achuthanandan's image and popularity remained rather outside the organization. So that was, that period witnessed some of the most bitter factionalism within CPIM. But that doesn't make him, in any way inferior in any respect, in the sense that he was actually all along, he was also continuing his agitations for the other causes that he championed.
Very interesting what you're saying there, and V.S. Achuthanandan came from, he had such humble beginnings, and climbing up the political ladder, not just in Communist Party of India, Marxist, but any political party in this great country of ours is no easy task. It has always been a greasy pole, but I want to get a perspective on it. Despite being denied the chief minister's post in 1996, and the chief ministerial post was a long time coming for VS there, and he was clipped later as chief minister. VS emerged even stronger in public perception. So, how do you explain that kind of a political capital?
Well, that is a very enigmatic side of his political career, because he, until about he was 70s, he was in his 70s, he was seen as a rigid orthodox Stalinist apparatchik. But what happened in the after 70s is quite a miracle, in the sense it was a reinvention of himself, a kind of a complete transformation that came about. In the sense that it was in the late 70s that he started to become a warrior of against corruption, start taking up causes of like women's rights and green politics, and even such a modern very very contemporary issue like the free software. He championed even that. All this happened after he passed his prime of life, that is after 70s, and he, as you said, by 83 he became the chief minister. And as a chief minister also, he was continued this particular in this same fashion, in the sense he was a person who was behind those punitive actions against the forest encroachers, the land mafia that happened in the in the hilly area of Munnar. And he was also instrumental in bringing to task certain very corrupt political leaders of other parties. And he also initiated a number of development activities also while he was chief minister. But at the same time, when he was chief minister also, he had his problems within the party, and which on very many occasions made his crown,
the Lavlin episode
as a crown of thorns.
The Lavlin episode created one of the biggest rifts within the
Yes.
Communist Party of India, Marxists, as you're talking. So, did that moment mark the beginning of the marginalization of Mr. VS?
Well, that was a very landmark chapter in Kerala's political history. SNC Lavlin scam, which is a multi-crore corruption case, in which Pinarayi Vijayan found himself to be an accused number 9, because it was this particular deal with the Canadian company a hydroelectric project for which the Canadian company essentially Lavlin was the had the contract, and it was signed while Pinarayi Vijayan was the power minister in the 90s.
Achuthanandan's
So
cabinet.
yeah. So what happened was that then there was this huge eruption of this case in which he was actually the Supreme Court. The case is still in Supreme Court, even though Pinarayi Vijayan was exonerated in the case by the High Court, single bench, and also the division bench, and also the CBI. But this was a case which became a big fodder for Achuthanandan to train his guns against his better as Pinarayi Vijayan in the party. So that was a turning point in which the hostilities came into the open. And both the veteran leaders of the Kerala Communist Party, found themselves ousted from the Politburo on one occasion. So these were quite momentous events in the history of Kerala politics, and it was after that the relations became completely strained, which never got patched again.
I'm sure you must have had an opportunity to have interaction with Mr. VS, and as you were a journalist there, covering him and his party for a pretty long time. But what kind of a leader was he? With closed doors, if you could share one of such wonderful anecdote that you have.
Well, he was as I said before, and he was quite an enigma in the sense that he did not have the conventional attributes that one could actually see externally on very popular political leaders. We always used to say that he was no intellectual, like for instance EMS Namboodiripad, or he was not a mass leader, or the person who was so warmly inclined towards the people like an A.K. Gopalan. Also, he did not have the wry sense of humor of an E.K. Nayanar. But in spite of all these things, he became almost, he in fact outclassed all these leaders in being the most popular and most revered leader, cutting across political parties. So that is because of the kind of sacrifices and the selflessness that he was actually synonymous with in his long career as a politician. Not just because of that, but by the late 90s and by the turn of the new century, most of those great glorious leaders of the communist parties were almost dead and gone. So he became, he was the last link to that heroic past of the communist movement. So he became a very almost an icon-like leader because of this, and not just because of it. As I said before, he took up certain issues like the environment, the women's issues, which are actually not quite common for the mainstream political leaders of that particular period. So in fact, he's credited with sort of merging the micropolitics with issues of micropolitics with the mainstream political movement, which is also very new. And besides all these things, he was the first Indian communist chief minister who belonged to the class which the party and the movement championed always, the working class and the socially backward caste. So it's an irony even that to say that the communist leadership has always been accused of being upper caste driven, urban centric, or highly educated kind of thing, in spite of their championing the working class. So he was the man. VS Achuthanandan, you take any state, Bengal and Tripura or Kerala, he was the first person to actually come from the actual middle class, working class, and also to a backward caste like the Edavas. So that also made him so distinct. So in many ways, Achuthanandan was a glorious exception.
Thank you very much. That's a nice way to wrap this interview. Thank you so much, Mr. MG Radhakrishnan, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.